Welcome to the 3 Knockdown Rule.
And welcome to the latest episode of Quick Jabs on 3 Knockdown Rule, brought to you by Hustler Casino. Again, this week, Evergreen Show with Jim Lampley talking about his new book, It Happened. And the week before, we talked to the editor-in-chief of Ring Magazine, Doug Fisher, while Mario Lopez is on assignment in Buffalo filming his latest holiday movie. Next week, we're going to take a week off, short hiatus, and then coming back in mid-May, Mario Lopez Steve Kim will be back with another regular edition of the 3 Knockdown Rule. All right, so let's get into it. Last week, Terence Crawford, of all people, caused a bit of a stir throughout the boxing world and on social media when he was on the Pound for Pound with Kamaru and Henry, very good podcast, and he made a bold comment. He said, Errol Spence, not really a Hall of Famer, if you look at his career. Now, did he hurt his own legacy by throwing and dousing cold water over what is his signature victory of his career? There's no doubt about it. I wouldn't have done it, but then that's the great thing about Terence Crawford. It's endearing, but also frustrating. The guy has no filter. He says what he means, and he means what he says. But here's what I found interesting. A lot of the Spence fans who still hold it against him that Crawford beat their man, then they started countering, well, he's not a Hall of Famer either. Guys, get rid of the copium. If Terence Crawford, by today's standards or any standard, is not a Hall of Famer, then there's no Hall of Famers moving forward. Let's look at the resume. 4 weight division champion, undisputed in 2 of them. And again, the run at 140, he wasn't exactly beating Tszyu or Frankie Randall. I get it. But it's still an unbelievable accomplishment. Also, for the better part of a decade, he's been on the pound for pound list. And if not number 1, in the top 2 or 3 for at least the past 6 or 7 years. Put all of that together. You look at the body of work. Not only is he a shoo-in, in my view, he should be a first ballot. Examining Errol Spence. Now, this is a tougher one. Keep this in mind. If Errol Spence were not to fight another professional prize fight, he only has 29 fights, not even 30, 28-1. The argument would be, well, he unified 3/4 of the welterweight titles and has a set of solid victories. Kell Brooks, Sean Porter, Mikey and Danny Garcia. I get that. But when you only have one weight class where you won a title, you have to be extraordinarily good and or dominant. And also, it's not just about the wins. The losses and how they come about matter. And we have to be blunt about this. This was not Tommy Hearns losing valiantly to Sugar Ray Leonard or Marvin Hagler. He absolutely got dominated on that particular night. Again, by today's standards, I do think that Errol Spence has a case. I don't know how strong of a case, and he might eventually get in, but let's get back into this with Crawford. Folks, no matter what you say, you could hate his guts, hold it against him, what he's done, what he says. He absolutely is a Hall of Famer, and I think about it, in this particular era, the guys that, in my view, are a no-brainer, and they get that check mark next to their name a couple years after their retirement, it'd be Terence Crawford, the Monster Inoue, Alexander Usyk, and Canelo. And some would say B-ball, but those 4 right there, that fearsome foursome, that quartet, they are absolutely, positively Canastota bound. Moving on with Quick Jabs on 3 Knockdown Rule, brought to you by Hustler Casino. Okay, there's a bevy of boxing this weekend. I wouldn't say any major fights, but fights of note. Right off the top, on Prime Video from the Land Down Under, Tszyu returns against Joey Spencer. Now, I don't know if this is what you'd call a must-win situation, but if he wants to remain relevant at 154, it is a must-win. And let's see if he can get past the former PBC Prospect of the Year. If he can't, his days as a notable fighter that actually matters on the world-class scene are absolutely over. That'd be 3 straight losses. And this is how quickly fortunes can change in this sport. Think about his situation. 12 to 13 months ago, he was riding high, had a major belt at 154, and people thought he might have been the best guy in that division, right? And then all of a sudden, he's supposed to fight a certain guy. I think it was Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman gets injured, pulls out. And then all of a sudden, he's matched up against Sebastian Fundora. And like a real fighter, to his credit, he says, short notice or not, I'm going to take on that tall order. Well, in a bloody battle, he gets upset. Now, the reality is that loss did not hurt him. With the nature of that fight, the valiant effort, showed a lot of grit, a lot of heart. People really didn't hold it against him. But then this was the problem. You can argue, did they rush him back against Bakram Murtalazayev or not? I'm not really sure they did. Fight against Fundora was in late March, and the other one took place in, I believe, mid-October. That's a pretty good amount of time. The problem is he kept running into left hooks and big right hands, and he was shook early, he never recovered, and now he got stopped. And the reality is he has to win. This is last chance saloon for Tszyu. Also on this day on ESPN Plus from Kazakhstan, Janibek, you know his last name, the unified middleweight champion of the world. He fights against the guy whose name I'm not going to even try to pronounce. All I can say is that if you spelled out that name in Scrabble, you'd probably get about 175 points. Here's the problem with Janibek. Not only is he unknown, he's inactive. And this has been the antithesis of what Tom Loeffler did with Gennady Golovkin, another notable fighter from that part of the world. They decided to work in volume and be really, really active and force their way into the consciousness of the boxing fan. As I look at Janibek's route, he is very, very inactive, and despite being a unified champion, I'm not so sure anyone really cares or even knows about him or this fight this weekend. But look, he's getting some activity. It is a homecoming. Hopefully, he will eventually get a showdown and further unify against Carlos Adames. Now, an Adames-Janibek fight is one that would really hold a lot of interest to the hardcore fans. And I just wonder, is that a type of fight that Turki Al-Sheikh would be willing to bankroll? That remains the big question. And finally on Quick Jabs on 3 Knockdown Rule, brought to you by Hustler Casino. Heavyweights take the stage. All right, from Manchester, England, crossroads battle. Joyce takes on Filip Hrgovic. To me, this is a must-win situation for both men here. Loser goes home, as they say, and Hrgovic is returning to the ring after his disappointing loss to Daniel Dubois. He will be led by Abel Sanchez, who retired not too long ago from training, but then he said, you know what, I'm back. And I asked him a couple months ago, I said, what brought you back to training boxers? And he said, Steve, I'm bored, and I figured out I'm not going to make the PGA Tour. And in fact, he's rebuilding a new gym. It turned out the Summit, remember that, where Gennady Golovkin did a lot of his preparation? He flat out sold that gym to Jaime Munguia. And I don't know if you folks know this, but Abel Sanchez really is a construction guy. And he actually has great fun constructing things from boxers to buildings. As for Joyce, loser out of 3 out of his last 4 fights. And he's the type of fighter based on his style and the punishment he takes. His decline was never going to be methodical and steady. It was going to be steep. And in the last fight or two, he really does look even slower and more ponderous than usual. And age 39, really showing every bit of that age. Finally, on Saturday night, Top Rank returns to Las Vegas on ESPN. A young heavyweight battle. You don't see this often enough in the sport of boxing. But I think everyone's rolling the dice here, especially the team of Richard Torrez Jr. Undefeated. He's been showcased on a lot of the Top Rank undercards. Well, he's having a legitimate step-up fight against Guido Vianello. Say what you want about Vianello. He's a much more seasoned heavyweight. Has some losses on his record. But again, sometimes that actually shows that you face live opposition. Something that, quite frankly, Torres has not. Now, Torres is southpaw. He can bang a little bit with that backhand. But I do worry about his size. Is he big enough by today's heavyweight standards to really make a mark in this division? And let's see if he can catch. Keep this in mind. Vianello is by far the best guy that he has faced thus far in his professional career. Also on this undercard, I always look forward to seeing what I believe is a 5-star blue chip young prospect. The young butcher, Abdullah Mason, is in action. All right, so that's it for Quick Jabs, brought to you by Hustler Casino on the 3 Knockdown Rule.